the boots struck the marble again. The same corridor, the same hour, the same man who had not slept in 8 years. His soldiers called him fearless. His healers called it something else, something they wrote in private notes and burned before morning. Because saying it aloud would have required a courage. None of them had yet managed to find 8 winters of footsteps in the dark, a throne room turning colder each year, a name he no longer spoke, and a noise behind his eyes that no tincture could silence. A grinding, a pressure, like something enormous pushing at a door that was never built to hold it. Then he stopped mid-step. His hand went to the wall. The candle in his fist guttered low, though no window was open, though no wind had found its way in. For one breath he stood perfectly still and listened, not to the storm clawing at the glass, but to something underneath it, something closer, something that should not have been there. Down the hall, a door he kept locked stood open a hand's width, and the light inside was not firelight. It was silver. He set the candle down, drew the blade from beside the desk without a sound. The ice cracked against the windows like knuckles. The torches in the courtyard had been dead for hours, and yet that thin silver glow kept moving along the floor, slow and certain, the way water moves over stone. He crossed the corridor, reached the door, pushed it open with the flat of the blade. The stories they told about King Edrin Veil were not exaggerated. That was the problem. Men who had fought beside him on the northern border said he did not sleep before battle, did not eat, did not sit. He simply stood at the edge of camp and stared into the dark like he was waiting for it to apologize. His soldiers called it fearlessness. His healers called it something else entirely, something they wrote in their private notes and never said out loud, because saying it out loud would have required a kind of courage none of them had yet managed to locate. 8 years. That was how long Grimwall Keep had watched its king pace the west corridor every night until dawn turned the stone walls from black to gray. 8 years of boots on marble. 8 years of guards changing shifts in silence, because no one wanted to be the man who made noise while the king was in one of his moods. 8 years of a throne room that felt colder every winter, not because of the mountain wind that came through the gaps in the east wing. Because Edrin Veil had stopped pretending he felt anything, and the whole kingdom had learned to pretend alongside him. It was easier that way for everyone. His wife's name was Saren. He did not speak it anymore, not out loud, not in council, not even in the privacy of his own chambers when the fire burned low, and the night stretched out long and merciless around him. He had stopped saying her name 3 years after she died because every time he did, something cracked open in his chest that took days to close again. And a king could not afford to walk around with a crack in his chest. He had learned that fast. Saren had died in the battle he won. The last battle, the one that finally pushed the Eastern Lords back past the Greyvale River and ended 20 years of border war. His generals had called it the greatest victory in 3 generations. They had held a feast, lit fires on every hilltop between Grimwall and the sea. The people had danced for 3 days straight. Edrin had stood in the middle of all of it and felt nothing, because the woman who was supposed to stand beside him had taken an arrow meant for one of his lieutenants, had died in the field tent with mud on her hands and her hair loose around her shoulders, had looked at him at the end and said something so quiet he still was not entirely sure he had heard it correctly. He thought she said, "Stay." He had not managed to do that either, not really. After the war ended, after the feasts burned out and the generals went home, and Grimwall settled into an uneasy peace, Edrin Veil simply stopped sleeping. Not all at once. First it was 3 hours a night. Then 2. Then one restless hour before dawn where he lay on his back staring at the ceiling and listening to the noise inside his skull that never fully stopped anymore. A grinding, a pressure, like something enormous trying to push through a door that was never meant to hold it. His healers had names for it. Good names. Careful names. They offered tinctures and teas and pressed herbs from the southern provinces. He tried some of them. They worked for a few nights. Then, his body adapted, and the noise came back louder than before, as if it was offended by the attempt. He stopped letting healers near him eventually. Not because he was proud, because he was tired of hoping, and then having that hope pulled back like a rug, yanked from under him. While he was still standing on it, tired of hope, he understood that feeling in his bones. Grimwall Keep sat at the edge of the northern plateau, like a man who had forgotten why he was standing there but was too stubborn to sit down. Black stone, high towers, windows that looked out over 100 miles of frozen mountain range that went blue and then gray, and then disappeared into weather. Most of the year, it was not a beautiful place, but it was honest. It did not pretend to be warmer than it was. It did not hang banners over the things that were broken. The wind came through the gaps in the east wing, and everyone knew about it, and nobody fixed it because the king never asked, and nobody wanted to be the first person to bring up something as trivial as cold hallways to a man who slept maybe 90 minutes a night on a good week. The servants kept their eyes down. The guards kept their mouths shut. The council kept their opinions inside their chests, where opinions were safe. And Lady Marin Duskwell kept everything running. She had been doing it for 8 years. Longer, if you counted the years before Saren died, when Edrin was a functional king who attended his own meetings and occasionally laughed at things. Marin had been his father's advisor before she was his. She knew Grimwall's accounts and its debts and its treaties and its soft spots the way a surgeon knows a patient's body. Every weakness, every place you could press and cause damage. She was 61 years old. Silver-haired, careful. The kind of woman who said very little and meant all of it. The servants were more frightened of her than they were of the king. Because the king might shout, might dismiss you, might fill the room with a cold fury that made your knees weak. But Marin Duskwell ruined you quietly, over time, in ways you did not notice until you were already finished. She had worked very hard to cultivate that reputation. It was useful. Calla Ren had been at Grimwall Keep for 3 years, and nobody knew her name. She knew this because she had tested it once, quietly, the way she tested most things. She had left her workstation in the East Linen Corridor for 2 full hours on a Tuesday afternoon, and not a single person came looking for her. Not a senior maid, not a housekeeper, not a guard. Nothing. She came back, picked up where she left off. And the world continued as if she had never existed in the first place. She did not find this as upsetting. She found it useful. Calla was 24 years old. Not tall, not remarkable to look at. Brown hair she kept pulled back and out of the way. Gray eyes that picked up everything and gave back nothing. She had been raised by an elderly couple in a village called Ashfin, 2 days' ride northeast of Grimwall in the mountain foothills. Good people, quiet people. They had never told her where she came from, and she had never pushed hard enough to find out. Because she had understood early, the way some children understand things without being told, that the answer would cost more than she was ready to pay. So she had learned to work instead. She was exceptionally good at it. She could change linens on a bed so smoothly the occupant would not know they had been changed. She could refill a fire without making a sound. She could enter a room, complete 3 tasks, and leave without the people in that room ever registering that someone had been there. It was not a talent that impressed anyone, but it kept her employed, kept her fed, and kept her invisible in a castle where visible people had a way of becoming problems. She was not interested in being a problem. She was interested in existing quietly until she figured out what existing was actually for. That was the plan. Vague, unglamorous, hers. The night everything changed was the 14th of November. She remembered the date because of the storm. A real one, not the usual Grimwall weather of relentless gray pressure and wind that found every gap in your clothing. This was the kind of storm that arrived with intention, the kind that made the mountain groan, ice on the windows by nightfall. The courtyard torches out before the 10th hour. 3 senior maids sick in their quarters with the rattling cough that had been moving through the staff since the week before. Calla was the only one left in the West Wing rotation, which was how she ended up standing outside the king's chambers at 11:30 at night, holding a stack of fresh linens and trying to remember how breathing worked. The 2 guards outside the door were not helping. They were not being unkind. They were simply displaying the particular expression of men who were about to make someone else's life very difficult and felt genuinely bad about it. "Majordomo sent me," Calla said. "Quiet." "Even we know," said the taller one. His name was Fenwick. She knew that because she had refilled the corridor torches outside his post every week for 2 years. He had never once looked at her long enough to register her face. "Housekeeper Bren's sick. You're the one they found." "Yes, he's." Fenwick glanced at the door, then back at her. "He came back from the border 3 days ago." She waited. It's been a difficult 3 days," the second guard said carefully. She had heard. Everyone had heard. The king had returned from a 6-week border survey with a deep gash across his shoulder that the healers had dressed and then been dismissed before they could finish. He had not attended the morning council in 3 days. He had not eaten in the Great Hall. He had, according to the kitchen staff who delivered his meals and retrieved them untouched, barely moved from his chambers at all. "He asked for the linens changed," Calla said. "I'm changing them." Fenwick opened his mouth, closed it, looked at his fellow guard with an expression that said, "I tried," then stepped aside. She pushed the door open. Warmth hit her first. The fireplace on the far wall was enormous and fully stoked. The room was amber and shadow, books everywhere. Weapons on the walls, functional ones, not decorative. A heavy oak desk covered in maps and correspondence, and at least 4 empty water cups, and one that was not empty. The windows were thick with ice on the outside, the storm pressing against the glacis like it wanted to be invited in. It smelled like cedar, like wood smoke, like something underneath those things that she did not have a word for. Something that made the air feel dense, alive. She did not look at him right away. She looked at the room, because looking at the room was the job. Because she had been in difficult situations before, and the rule she had developed was, keep moving, look at what needs doing. Do it. Leave. But then she heard his breathing. Uneven. Controlled in the way something is controlled when someone is actively working to control it, which is different from actual calm, the same way a clenched fist is different from an open hand. She looked. King Edrin Veil sat in the heavy chair beside the fireplace. One arm braced along the armrest, the other resting across his knee. He wore dark trousers and a loose shirt, untucked, the collar open. He looked like a man who had started getting dressed and then lost interest halfway through, and the world had simply failed to correct him about it. He was larger than she had expected. She had seen him at distance before. Crossing the courtyard, at the far end of the great hall during formal occasions, where she was carrying something, and not looking at anything she was not supposed to be looking at. Distance made men comprehensible. Up close, Edrin Veil was something else entirely. Not frightening exactly. More like standing next to a thing that contained enormous pressure. Like a dam. Like you understood intellectually that it was holding. But you also understood that it was doing so by choice. Not necessity. His eyes were dark, almost black in the firelight. He was already looking at her. Not the way nobles looked at servants. Through them. Around them. Never quite at them. He was looking directly at her with the focused attention of a man who made decisions for a living and was currently making one about her. She lowered her gaze immediately. Not from fear. From sense. "You're not Bren," he said. "No, Your Majesty. She's ill. I'm in her rotation tonight." Silence. She moved toward the bed. Focused. Keep moving. Change the linens. Leave. Then she saw the bandage. It was on his left shoulder, visible through the open collar and loose fall of his shirt. And it was wrong. The wrapping had soaked through on the lower edge. Not fresh bleeding, but recent enough. Recent enough that someone should have redressed it hours ago. Recent enough that the skin around the bandage edge looked warm and too tight. Her hands stopped moving. "Don't," she told herself. "Don't say anything. This is not your business. He has healers." He dismissed the healers, yes, but that is a choice he is entirely allowed to make. He is the king. This is his body. This is absolutely not your concern. "Your shoulder," she said. The words were out before the argument finished. The room went completely still. She felt it. The quality of the silence changed, like a pressure shift, like the moment before weather. "You just spoke to the king," her brain observed helpfully, without being addressed. "About his person." Well done. Truly outstanding judgment from the girl, who was just thinking about how useful it is to be invisible. Edrin had not moved. "The bandage," she said, because if she was already over the edge, she might as well keep going. "It's soaked through on the lower edge. It needs to be changed." More silence, then. The healers were dismissed. "I'm not a healer." She met his eyes briefly, then looked down again. "I'm a maid. I've changed bandages before. If you'd rather I leave it, you're still here." She was not entirely sure what that meant, but he had not told her to get out. And in her experience, silence from people with authority was generally permission to continue doing whatever you were doing until told otherwise. She set down the linens, went to the basin near the wall, found clean cloth, found the small pot of salve left on the shelf, still sealed, untouched. She brought both to where he sat and stopped 2 feet away. "May I?" she asked. He looked at her for a moment, dark eyes steady, unreadable. "Yes," he said. She worked quietly. The old bandage came away carefully. The wound underneath was a clean gash, deep but not ragged, the kind that came from a blade rather than an accident. It had been stitched properly. Someone had done good work. But it had not been kept clean since. And the edges were starting to complain about that. She cleaned it, applied the salve, began the new wrapping. Her hands were steady. She had learned a long time ago to keep her hands steady when other things were not. It was a useful skill, possibly the most useful one she had. She was almost finished when it happened. Her fingertips pressed along the edge of the new bandage, smoothing it flat against his shoulder. A long, even pressure, just to make sure it would hold. Nothing more than that. Nothing intended, and Edrin Veil exhaled, slowly, completely, like a man setting down something extraordinarily heavy that he had been carrying for a very long time and had forgotten he was allowed to put down. His shoulders dropped. A fraction, but she felt it. She felt the change in him the way you feel a change in the weather. In the air, in the room. The grinding pressure she had noticed when she walked in, that dense, alive quality around him, it was still there, but quieter. Like someone had turned down a volume that had been running loud for too long. Calla went very still. She did not understand what was happening, but she was a woman who had spent 24 years paying careful attention to the things around her. And every part of her that paid attention was paying attention. Now, Edrin's eyes were closed, not asleep. Not quite, but close. Closer than she suspected he had been in longer than she could guess. "Don't move," she told herself, and meant it entirely differently than before. His breathing slowed. One breath, another. The fire crackled. The storm pressed against the glass.
And the most feared man in the Northern Territories sat in his chair beside the fire and breathed like a man who had just remembered how.
She did not know how long they stayed like that. Long enough for the fire to shift and settle. Long enough for her knees to start complaining quietly about the position she was holding. Long enough for her to become aware, in a very detached and clinical way, that she was sitting beside the king of Grimwall at nearly midnight, watching him sleep. and that this was not anywhere on the list of things she had expected to do with this Tuesday. His hand was still around her wrist. She noticed that at some point, his grip had found her wrist while she was focused on the bandage and had simply stayed there. Not forceful. Not conscious, maybe. Just present, like his hand had made a decision his brain had not been consulted about. Calla looked at his hand, looked at his face, looked at the fire. This is fine, she thought. Everything is completely fine. I'm sitting in the king's private chambers in the middle of the night, while he sleeps holding my wrist, and that is a perfectly ordinary thing that happens to perfectly ordinary maids on perfectly ordinary Tuesday evenings, and none of this is going to have any consequence whatsoever. She sat very still and tried not to breathe too loudly. She fell asleep. She was not proud of this. In her defense, she had been awake since 4 a.m. She had carried firewood through 3 corridors, polished the upper landing silver, taken 2 extra meal rotations because of the sick staff, and then stood outside the king's door in the cold before coming in here where it was warm and the fire was going. And the room had somehow become the quietest place in the entire castle. She had not planned it, but at some point her head dipped, and then again. And then the warmth behind her found something solid to rest against, and she was gone. She dreamed about nothing. Just dark, just warmth, just the sound of steady breathing that was not her own. It was the best sleep she had gotten in months. Gray light. That was the first thing. Gray light coming in around the edges of the heavy curtains. The particular colorless light in the morning after a storm. Everything quiet. Everything still. Calla's eyes opened. She became aware of several things simultaneously. She was warm, very warm. She was horizontal. She was on something firm and breathing. There was a weight across her waist that was a human arm, heavy and certain. Her cheek was resting against fabric that smelled like cedar, and something darker beneath that. And the sound she could hear most clearly was a heartbeat that was not hers. She did not move. She simply lay there for approximately 3 seconds and let understanding arrive at its own pace. And then understanding arrived and she stopped breathing entirely. No. This is not the chair. When did this stop being the chair? Why is this not the chair? The chair was the acceptable location for falling asleep in a king's chambers. Not ideal, not recommended. Not a situation she would voluntarily repeat, but defensible, survivable, an accident anyone might have in a warm room after a very long day. But this is not the chair. This is a bed. This was a bed. She was in the king's bed, under the king's blanket, against the king's chest. With the king's arm around her waist, like this, was somewhere she was supposed to be, and someone had forgotten to tell him that it was not. She needed to leave. Immediately. She needed to leave immediately and quietly, and pretend this had happened to someone else. Some other maid, some other Tuesday, some other universe where she had made different choices in the last 8 hours. She shifted. The arm tightened. A sound came from above her. Low, not quite awake. Something between a growl and a warning. Something that came from somewhere in him that operated below the level of language. She froze. Right. Okay. Not leaving yet. His breathing settled again. She stared at the ceiling and tried to calculate how bad this was on a scale of 1 to complete catastrophe. The answer kept coming back the same. Complete catastrophe was being generous. Then the sound came from outside. Boots on marble. More than one pair. Voices, low and quick, getting closer. No, she thought. No, not yet. The chamber doors opened. 3 guards stepped through. They got 2 steps into the room before they stopped. One of them had clearly been mid-sentence about something. The sentence did not finish. It simply stopped existing because the man speaking it had seen what was in the bed, and his brain had politely stepped outside to wait for him somewhere more manageable. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. They were the longest 4 seconds Calla had experienced since the time she dropped an entire tray of crystal glasses in the east hallway during a formal dinner. And that had only been embarrassing. This was something with no existing category. Goddess above, someone whispered. The oldest guard, Sarath. She recognized him. He had worked the West Wing longer than she had been alive. Recovered first. His voice was the careful voice of a man trying not to wake something that should not be woken. Get the girl away from him, he said quietly. The eyes opened dark, immediate, fully awake in the way that people who are always half ready to respond wake up. All the way, all at once. Nothing gradual about it. The temperature in the room shifted. Every guard felt it. Edrin did not move, did not shout, did not reach for anything. He simply looked at the men standing inside his door and let the silence do the work that other men needed weapons for. Then he spoke, quiet, completely calm. The kind of calm that is more frightening than anger, because anger means someone has lost control. And this was not that. Wake her, he said, and you find other employment. Permanently, nobody moved. The guards stood in perfect stillness, and Calla lay in perfect stillness, and the fire had burned down to low, amber coals, and outside the storm had finally finished, and the morning was still and gray and very cold, and completely indifferent to anyone's problem. Edrin looked down at her then. She felt it before she saw it. The quality of his attention changed when it landed on her, less like assessment. More like something he was trying to figure out. You're awake, he said. Yes, Your Majesty. How long? A few minutes. A pause. Are you frightened? She thought about lying. It seemed like the reasonable thing to do. The diplomatically correct answer was, no, of course not. Why would I be frightened? I often fall asleep in the chambers of the most powerful man in the Northern Territories. This is just Tuesday for me. A little, she said. Something shifted in his face. Not softened exactly. More like a very small adjustment in something that had been set very hard for a very long time. No one in this room will harm you, he said. She believed him, which was interesting because she did not usually believe things that quickly. He sat up. The arm around her waist moved. She pulled herself upright and put distance between them in one motion and looked at the floor and tried to pretend she was not the color of new brick, which she almost certainly was. The guards had gone back to staring at the space just left of her head in the practiced way of people, pretending to observe nothing. Edrin stood. He moved the way she had expected, completely, filling whatever space he occupied without effort. Without announcement, he picked up the dark coat draped across the chair and settled it around his shoulders with the automatic movements of someone who had done the same thing 10,000 mornings. He looked at the guards. Leave us. They left. The doors closed. Calla stood in the middle of the room and looked at the floor and tried to decide whether leave us was a good thing or the kind of thing you said before you explained to someone exactly how much trouble they were in. What is your name? He said. She looked up. Not a question. An instruction. She had noticed that about how he spoke. No sentence required the other person to offer anything. They simply stated the space where information should go and waited for the space to be filled. Calla Ren, Your Majesty. He looked at her. That complete attention. Like her name had gone somewhere specific, and he would find it there again when he needed it. How long have you worked in the West Wing? 3 years. I don't know your face. She did not know what to do with that. It was not quite an apology. Not quite anything. Most people don't, she said. Something moved through his expression. Your shoulder, she said. Because she needed to say something that was not about the other thing. How does it feel this morning? He rotated it. A careful quarter rotation. Testing? Better than yesterday, he said. Good. It should be kept clean. The salve twice a day if you'll allow. The healers are dismissed. I'm not a healer. He looked at her again. The same way as before. No, he said. You're not. A long pause. The fire settling. The morning pressing in around the curtains. "You'll remain in the West Wing," he said finally. She blinked. "I'm sorry, your rotation. You'll remain in the West Wing. I'm scheduled for the East." "Not anymore." She opened her mouth, closed it. "He just reassigned you," her brain noted. "Like a piece of furniture being moved to a more convenient location. You are now a piece of furniture in the West Wing. This is your life now." "Yes, Your Majesty," she said. He nodded once, moved toward the door, then stopped. "Calla Ren." He said, "Yes?" He did not turn around. "You have a steady hand." Then he opened the door and walked out, and the guards outside scrambled to fall into position behind him. And the corridor swallowed him up, and the room was empty except for her. She stood in the middle of it for a long moment, looked at the bed, the chair, the low fire. Right, she thought. Right, then by midday, the entire castle knew. Calla discovered this the way she discovered most things, by walking through a room and watching it change around her. The south kitchen went quiet when she entered to collect the morning tray. The laundry corridor emptied with unusual speed when she came down the back stairs. 2 junior maids she passed on the east landing looked at her like she had grown a second head, and then looked away so fast they nearly walked into the wall. She kept her face even, kept moving, collected what she needed, returned to the West Wing, and nearly ran directly into Lady Marin Duskwell at the top of the stairs. Marin was not a tall woman. She had never needed to be. She had a kind of presence that did not require height. 61 years of knowing exactly what was happening in this castle at every moment, and using that knowledge with surgical precision, had given her a stillness that felt deliberate. Every part of her was deliberate. The silver hair dressed simply and correctly, the dark wool of her coat, the hands folded in front of her at exactly the angle of a woman who was being patient on purpose. She looked at Calla. Calla stopped. Marin's eyes moved over her. Thorough, unhurried. The same kind of assessment Calla had felt from the king the night before, but different in character, where Edrin Veil's attention felt like the attention of a man trying to understand something unexpected. Marin's felt like the attention of a woman looking at something she had already classified, and was now verifying the classification. She did not look surprised. That was the thing Calla noticed. In a castle full of shocked faces and wide eyes, and people nearly walking into walls, Lady Marin Duskwell looked at her and did not look surprised at all. "Calla Ren," Marin said slowly, like she was tasting the syllables, like she had said them before, somewhere else, in some other context, and was comparing the sound to a memory. "My lady," Calla said, "you were in the king's chambers last night. I was assigned the West Wing rotation." "Yes," Marin tilted her head a fraction. "And this morning you were still there. I fell asleep." "It won't happen again." "No," Marin said. "I expect it won't." She looked at Calla for another long moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Not anger, not concern. Something more careful than either. "The West Wing suits you?" she asked. It sounded like the beginning of a reasonable conversation. It did not feel like one. "I go where I'm assigned, my lady." Calla said. Marin smiled. "Small." "Correct. Of course you do." She unclasped her hands, smoothed them once against her coat. "Finished." "Mind your work," she said. "The West Wing has particular expectations." And then she moved past her and down the corridor. Calla stood at the top of the stairs and watched her go, and felt, in the place where her instincts lived and spoke in feelings rather than words, that something had just happened that she did not yet understand. She did not like that feeling. She filed it carefully and went back to work. 3 weeks into the arrangement, Edrin started attending his own council meetings again. Nobody said anything about this directly. That was the Grimwall way. You did not comment on the return of something that should never have left. You simply adjusted around its presence and pretended the absence had been a reasonable temporary condition rather than 8 winters of a king, slowly coming apart at the seams while everyone looked carefully at the middle distance. But they noticed, the guards noticed, because the west corridor was quiet at night now. Not every night, not perfectly, but enough. Enough that Fenwick had mentioned it to his replacement at the shift change 3 mornings running, and they had both stood there in the dark hallway saying nothing because there was nothing adequate to say about it. The kitchen staff noticed because the morning trays started coming back empty. The council noticed because Edrin sat through a 2-hour trade dispute without once looking at the windows, like he was considering whether the drop from the 3rd floor would be survivable. Small things. Quiet things. The kind of changes that only become visible in retrospect, when you look back and realize the room has been slowly warming for weeks without anyone lighting a new fire. Calla noticed all of it. She noticed because noticing was what she did. What she had always done. Paid attention to the things other people filed as background. The quality of a silence. The way a man's shoulders sat differently after good sleep than after bad. The particular way Edrin moved through a room, when the noise inside him was manageable versus when it was not, which was a distinction she had learned to read the way a sailor reads weather. Not because anyone told her how, because she watched. She watched a lot. That was the problem. Because the more she watched, the more she saw. And the more she saw, the harder it became to maintain the careful, practical distance she had decided on somewhere around day 3 of the West Wing rotation, when she had understood clearly that this situation required her to be useful and invisible in equal measure. And that anything else was a complication she absolutely could not afford. She was doing well with useful. Invisible was getting complicated. 3 nights after the first, Edrin summoned her again. Not formally, not through the majordomo, through Fenwick, who appeared at the linen station at 9:30 and said, with the expression of a man trying to be professionally neutral about something that was not professionally neutral at all. His Majesty requests your presence in the West Wing. When you have a moment, the king had sent a guard to politely request her presence. She had needed a second to make sure she had heard that correctly. She went. He was in the chair again. Different clothes, same fire, same collection of maps and correspondence that had apparently not moved significantly since the last time she was there. He looked tired in the specific way he always seemed to look tired. Not sleepy, but worn. Like a piece of good equipment that has been in use too long without maintenance. He did not explain why he had summoned her. She did not ask. She pulled the small chair from near the desk without being invited to and set it at a reasonable angle from his and sat down. He watched her do this. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at the fire. He was asleep within the hour. She watched the fire for a while after that. Listened to his breathing slow and deepen into something real. Something genuine. Not the controlled breathing of a man managing himself, but the involuntary breathing of someone who had finally gone somewhere. The noise could not follow. She thought about that, about what it meant that she could do this. She did not have an answer. She was not sure there was one that would make sense, but she noticed, while she was sitting in the quiet and he was sleeping in it, that the room felt different when he was at rest. Like the pressure had gone somewhere else. Like the castle had exhaled. Like things could be still. She had not known, before this, that she needed things to be still. But sitting there in the amber light, with the storm quiets outside and the fire low, and the most feared king in the Northern Territories, sleeping 6 feet away from her like a man who had been given permission to stop fighting for one night, she understood something she had not understood before. She was also tired. She had been tired for a very long time. She just had not known what rest was supposed to feel like. She thought she was beginning to. It started with the shoulder. She came to redress the bandage on the 8th day and found it already changed. Someone had done it. Someone who knew what they were doing. Clean edges, right tension, the kind of wrapping that held without restricting movement. She looked at it for a moment. "You did this yourself," she said. "Yes. It's better than the healers were managing." A pause. "I watched you." She did not say anything to that. She checked the edges carefully, confirmed the wrapping was sound, and straightened up. And she was almost to the door when she became aware that he was not doing the thing he usually did when she moved to leave. He was watching her. Still, she turned. "Is there something else, Your Majesty?" He was quiet for a moment. His eyes had that quality they got sometimes. Like he was working something out and had not decided yet whether to say the conclusion out loud. "You don't ask questions," he said. "No." "Why not?" She thought about it. "Because you'd answer them if you wanted me to know." Something moved through his expression. Not quite a smile. The structural ancestor of one. "Most people," he said, "can't stand the silence, I know." She glanced at the window, the mountains, the particular gray-white of the sky before afternoon snow. "I grew up in a quiet house." "You learn to live in it, or you spend your whole life fighting it." He looked at her. "Which did you do?" "I learned to live in it," she said. Mostly, she left, and stood in the corridor for a minute after the door closed and told herself that was a perfectly ordinary exchange. Normal, unremarkable. The kind of conversation that happened between two people who were simply occupying the same space regularly, and therefore occasionally exchanged words. Absolutely nothing about that required further examination. She examined it for 3 days. On the 19th day, she found him at the desk at 2 in the morning. She had not been summoned. She was returning a candle holder to the West Wing storage and saw the light under his door and heard the sound she had learned to recognize. The pacing, the particular rhythm of boots on stone when the noise was bad, when whatever lived inside him had found its way up through the floor of the quiet and was pressing at the walls again. She should have kept walking. She knocked. A long pause. Then, "Come." He was standing at the window. Not pacing anymore. Just standing. Looking out at the dark where the mountains were, where you could not see them, but you knew they were there. His coat was off. His sleeves rolled to the elbow. He looked like a man who had been fighting something for hours and had not lost yet but was not winning either. She set the candle holder on the shelf by the door. Then she pulled the small chair to its usual position and sat down. He turned and looked at her. "You weren't summoned," he said. "No, it's 2 in the morning. I know. You should be asleep, so should you." The silence after that was different from the usual kind. It had edges. He turned back to the window. She looked at the fire, and slowly, the way it always happened, the pressure in the room began to ease. Not because anything was said. Because she was there. Because whatever the thing was that lived between her presence and his noise, it did not need words to do its work. He came away from the window eventually, sat in his chair, closed his eyes. She stayed. At some point, she said quietly, into the near dark. "What does it sound like?" The noise, a long pause. She thought he would not answer. "Like everything I haven't finished yet," he said. "All of it. At once." All the time she sat with that. "That's a lot to carry," she said finally. "Yes. Has anyone ever told you that you're allowed to put some of it down?" The silence that followed was very long. And very particular. "No," he said. "Not in a way I believed." She did not have an answer for that. She just stayed in the chair and let the fire do what it did. And eventually his breathing slowed. And the noise in the room went wherever it went when she was there and he slept. She stayed until the sky started going gray. Then she left. And she did not examine that one at all. Because she already knew what the examination would find. And she was not ready to name it yet. There was a formal dinner in the Great Hall on the 14th evening, the seasonal council gathering. First one Edrin had attended in 3 weeks. Calla was in the rotation carrying wine. She moved through the tables with the practiced invisibility she had spent years developing. eyes on the glasses. Track who needs refilling. Don't look at faces. Don't be a face. Lady Marin sat at the far end of the high table. Every few minutes, without looking at her directly, Calla felt Marin's attention track across the room, to where she stood. She had noticed this over the last 2 weeks, the way Marin's attention found her. Not constantly. Not obviously. But consistently, the way a compass finds north. Like she was something Marin kept needing to check on. She did not know what to do with that yet. Near the middle of the dinner, Lord Casson, one of the Eastern Council members, a precise man she had watched at dozens of these gatherings, made a comment. She did not hear the whole thing. Only the end of it, the maid, of all people. One has to wonder what exactly she's offering that 8 years of healers couldn't manage. The table around him laughed. Careful laughs. The kind that mean I want this moment to pass before the king hears it. Calla set the wine down with a steady hand and moved on. Did not look up. Did not change her pace. Did not let a single thing she was feeling reach her face. And from the far end of the high table, she felt Marin Duskwell watching her navigate that moment, and she could not read what was in that attention at all, and that bothered her more than the laughter had. She came back to the wine station and stood for a moment and breathed. Steady. Fine. She was fine. Then she heard footsteps on the main stairs, and the entire hall quieted the way halls quiet when something with gravity enters them, and she looked up, and Edrin Veil stood at the top of the entry steps in full council dress and looked across the room and found her, not the wine station, not the general rotation area, her directly. And then he descended the stairs, and the conversations that had briefly paused resumed, and she went back to refilling glasses and told herself that she had imagined it, that a king did not cross a room full of nobles to look for a maid. That was not a thing. That happened. That was not a thing. She should allow herself to believe. She almost convinced herself. She did not convince herself. Toward the end of the evening, she was crossing the space between 2 tables when she heard Marin's voice, positioned precisely to carry. "Tell me," Marin said, to no one in particular, in the way of someone who intends everyone nearby to hear. "What does one suppose she actually said to earn his attention?" At that hour, in that room, silence around the table, Calla stopped. Not because she was told to. Because every instinct she owned told her that this was not a comment. This was a test. And she was already standing in the middle of it. She turned, looked at Lady Marin Duskwell directly, for the first time. In public. Without flinching and without performing the performance of looking away. Marin held her gaze. And smiled. The smile of someone who has just gotten the answer they were looking for, even if the audience around them did not know a question had been asked. Then Edrin was there, not close enough to have heard. Close enough that every head in the room turned. He had come off the high table and crossed the room, and Calla had not tracked him, and she should have tracked him. She should always track where the largest source of potential consequence in any room is moving. And she had been too focused on Marin, and now he was standing 7 feet away, looking at the exchange with dark, quiet eyes. He looked at the table. At Marin. At the other faces. Then at Calla. "The south corridor needs attention," he said to her. Which was not a statement about any corridor. Everyone in the room understood that. "Yes, Your Majesty," she said. She walked with him out of the hall, and behind her, she heard the silence that a room makes when it has witnessed something it does not yet have the language for. In the corridor, he slowed. Stopped. "Are you all right?" he said. Not a question. An instruction? The space where the answer went. She thought about it honestly. "I've had quieter weeks." Something moved through his eyes. Then settled back into the familiar calibrated distance. "They'll talk," he said. "They're already talking. It will get louder." She looked at him. "Direct, Your Majesty, with respect. People have been talking about me my entire life. Mostly they say I'm the girl no one can remember. That's usually better. He looked at her for a long moment. "You should have left the room," he said. "That night, I know." "Why didn't you?" She thought about it. The real answer, not the acceptable answer. "Because you needed to sleep," she said. "And I didn't know how to leave when you needed something I could give you." The corridor was very quiet. The fire in the wall bracket between them made the only sound. Edrin looked at her for a long time. Then, "The West Wing rotation. Yes, it's yours." Permanently, she opened her mouth. "Not open for discussion," he said, and walked back toward the hall, and left her standing in the corridor with the fire and the quiet and the distinct, growing certainty that, whatever that Tuesday 14 days ago had started, it was not finished, not even close. The mark appeared on a Wednesday. Ordinary Wednesday. Afternoon. Low light coming in from the north windows. She was in Edrin's chambers, checking the wound on his shoulder, which had largely healed by then. A thin pink line along his shoulder that would eventually become a white scar. Functional. Done. She was pressing along the edges of the fading scar tissue to check for any remaining heat. And her fingers were at a particular angle, and the light was at a particular angle through the window, and she felt it before she saw it. Warmth. Under her skin. On her chest. Below her collarbone, not sharp. Not painful. Just warmth spreading outward from a point. Slow and certain, like sunlight finding a specific place and settling there. She pulled her hand back, looked down. Through the fabric of her dress, she could see it. Faintly, a light, silver, soft and precise. Moving like water on stone. She stared at it. Her brain offered several possible explanations in rapid succession. None of them were good. None of them were ones she wanted. Calla, Edrin's voice. Low. He had seen it, too. Was already standing, already close. Looking at the light through the dark fabric of her dress, with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not calm, not alarmed. Something between the two that did not have a comfortable name. "Stand still," he said. "I'm standing still," she said. Her voice came out even. She was proud of that. "It appeared when you touched. I know when it appeared." He looked at her face, then at the mark, then back at her face. "Aldwin," he said. "Not to her. She's not here. She will be." He went to the door. Said something to Fenwick outside in a voice too low to hear. Came back. Stewed near the fireplace. Looked at her. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine standing." "You went white. I'm always." She stopped. "All right, that's fair." She sat. The mark was still there. She could feel it through the fabric. Warm, steady, not going anywhere. She pressed her fingers flat against the outside of her dress over the spot. Just to confirm it was real. It was real. It pressed back against her palm with a warmth that felt like a word in a language she did not speak yet. "What are you?" she thought at it. It did not answer. Obviously, Priestess Aldwin arrived in 20 minutes. She was 70-something. Calla estimated. White hair. The particular economy of movement that very old people develop, where every motion has a purpose and nothing is wasted. She carried herself like someone who had seen a great ideal and had organized it all into a careful system, and was not easily surprised by new additions. Until she saw the mark. Then she was surprised. She stood in front of Calla with her eyes moving over the visible edge of the light, and her face went through 3 expressions in the space of 4 seconds. Recognition, dread, and then something that looked almost like grief. "Show me," she said quietly. Calla pulled the neckline of her dress aside. Far enough. Aldwin looked at it for a long time. "Did not touch it. Did not speak, priestess," Edrin said. One word, the word that meant now. Aldwin straightened, clasped her hands, and spoke. The Edrin Veil bloodline. Not a story Calla had heard. Not a name from any conversation she could pull up from 3 years of Grimwall Keep. But Aldwin told it the way people tell things that have been kept too long in closed rooms, with a certain release. Like the telling was its own kind of relief. The Edrin Veil were the oldest family in the Northern Territories. Not nobles in the political sense. Something older. Something that predated the council and the keep and the formal borders on the maps. A bloodline that appeared, historically, at the edges of reigns that were in trouble. Not because they sought power, because their nature was to stabilize, to find the thing that was unbalanced and stand beside it until it found its own level. It was not magic exactly, not a gift exactly, something closer to what a river does to stone. Slow, patient, effective, not by force. By presence, the last known Edrin Veil estate had burned 24 years ago. Every record said the same thing. No survivors. The bloodline ended in ash. And no one had looked particularly hard for reasons why, because the people who might have looked had reasons of their own for not looking. The mark only appears, Aldwin said carefully, in the presence of the person the bloodline is bound to stabilize. Silence. Calla looked at Edrin. Edrin looked at the mark. She's 24, he said. Yes, Aldwin paused. The timing would be consistent with a child hidden the night of the fire. A child, Calla thought. The night of the fire. She heard herself say from a considerable distance, I was raised by a couple in Ashfin. They never explained where I came from. No, Aldwin said softly. I imagine they wouldn't have. Calla pressed her hand flat against the mark again. Breathed. You're fine, she told herself. This is fine. You just found out your entire life is built on something you didn't know about, and the thing you didn't know about has now appeared on your body in a room with the most powerful man in the Northern Territories and an elderly priestess who looks like she's been waiting for this conversation for 20 years, but it's fine. Absolutely fine. Completely normal Wednesday. Who ordered the fire? Edrin said. Aldwin was quiet for a moment. I have records, she said carefully. I've kept them. I wasn't sure I would ever need them. Get them, he said. She came back within the hour. A leather case. Old, worn smooth at the corners from years of being handled and then carefully put back. She set it on the desk and opened it with the deliberate movements of someone who has practiced not being afraid of something for a very long time. Seals. Dated correspondence going back 24 years. Edrin read them. He read them with the face he used for difficult council reports. Still. Controlled. The face that processed things without letting the processing be visible to the room. Calla had seen it before. She had learned to read what it cost him. She watched it cost him now. And then his hand stopped on one page. Flat. Still. He said nothing for a very long time. Then he set the document down, looked at Aldwin. This is verified. Yes. The seal is hers. Yes, Your Majesty. Calla looked at the document from across the room. She could see the seal at the bottom. A specific one. She had seen it before. Small, precise. On correspondence that moved through the West Wing regularly. Whose seal is? That, she said. Edrin did not answer immediately. Aldwin looked at her with the expression of someone delivering something they have been carrying too long. Lady Marin Duskwell. She said, when she was 30 years old and had just joined the Inner Council, before your king's father died, before everything changed. She ordered the Edrin Veil estate burned and the bloodline ended, because she believed what they represented was a threat to the council's authority, silence, complete and absolute. Calla sat with this. Marin Duskwell, silver hair, careful hands. The smile that was always precisely correct. The attention that found Calla in rooms and stayed there. She recognized you, said the part of Calla that had been filing things. She recognized you from the first week. That's what that attention was. Not curiosity, verification. She was confirming what she suspected and deciding what to do about it. She's been watching me, Calla said. Flat. Yes, Aldwin said, since I started in the West Wing. Almost certainly before that. Calla looked at the fire. Breathed. Then looked at Edrin. He was looking at the document. Not at her. At the document. At the seal. At 8 years of council and administration and trust. All of it sitting on top of this one piece of paper like a building on sand. She could see it happening in him. The architecture of his certainty adjusting. Slowly. The way stone adjusts when the thing beneath it shifts. That was the part she found hardest to witness. Not her own discovery. His. He did not summon her that night. She waited in the West Wing storage room on the pretense of inventory. She did not do any inventory. She sat on a wooden crate and looked at the wall and thought about everything she had learned in the last 2 hours and tried to find the place where she supposed to feel something specific about it. She could not find it. She felt things. Many things. But they did not sort neatly into categories. They came in a pile. A fire she did not remember. Parents she could not name. 24 years of not knowing. Where she came from and now knowing. And the knowing was worse than the not knowing, because the knowing had a body count. And underneath all of that, quieter and more persistent than she wanted it to be, Edrin, alone in that room, reading that document, understanding what it meant about the person he had trusted most, while the rest of the world watched his wife die and the rest of the world slowly abandoned him to the noise in his head. Stop it, she told herself. He's fine. He's the king. Kings manage things. That's the entire job. She thought about the night she had asked him what the noise sounded like everything I haven't finished yet. She pressed her hand over the mark. It was warm. 3 days passed. She did the West Wing rotation, changed the linens, tended the fires, carried the trays, did the work, and did not go to his door because he had not asked, and she had decided that she would not push past the line of what she was invited to do, because that was the only rule she had left, and it was a good rule, and she was going to keep it. He came to her on the 3rd evening. She was in the corridor outside the linen storage, folding, not thinking about anything, trying not to think about anything, which is a different activity with different outcomes. His footsteps on the stone. She knew them without looking up. You've been avoiding the chambers, he said. You haven't summoned me. I know, she kept folding. Square edges, straight lines, something manageable. Are you? He stopped. She looked up. He looked uncomfortable. Not the usual controlled distance. Actually uncomfortable in the way of a man who knows what he wants to say and is not sure how to say it. Which was, she suspected, not a state he found himself in often. The document, he said. Yes, I've been processing. I know, I don't process things quickly when they involve. He stopped again. Trust, she said quietly. He held her gaze. A long moment. Yes, she set the folded linen down, squared it up, looked at the wall. She was watching me because she recognized the bloodline markers, she said. Probably my eyes. Aldwin said the Edrin Veil had distinctive gray eyes. She would have known that. She knew what she was looking at the moment someone mentioned my name. Yes. And she's been deciding what to do about it. Yes. His voice was very flat, which means she knows the mark appeared. She knows what it means, and she knows I know about the fire. Calla thought about Marin's smile in the corridor 3 weeks ago. Mind your work, not a warning. A measurement. She's not going to wait, Calla said. No, he said, she's not. Marin moved on a Thursday, not with violence, not with anything as simple as violence, with something far more effective. Conversation. Carefully placed. In precisely the right rooms. With precisely the right people. By Friday morning, 3 council members had independently requested a formal session saying to address what they were calling the question of the West Wing Maid and her apparent influence over His Majesty's decision-making. The phrasing was Marin's. Calla could hear her in every word of it. Clean. Neutral sounding. Devastating underneath. The formal session was scheduled for Monday. Calla heard about it from Fenwick, who heard it from the council secretary. Low voice. Quick. And then away before anyone could ask follow-up questions. She sat with the information. Turned it over. The logic of it was clean. She had to give Marin that. Marin was not going to come at Edrin directly. He was the king. You did not come at the king directly. You came at the thing beside him. The thing without rank or title or political protection. The thing that could be questioned and doubted and quietly removed without anyone needing to make a formal move against the crown. You came at Calla, and Calla had nothing. No title, no family name she could use, no political standing, no proof of her own bloodline beyond a mark on her chest that Marin, a sign, would call a fabrication in front of the whole council and make it sound entirely reasonable. She thought about what Aldwin had said. The records, the leather case, the seal on that document. She thought about what she actually had and what she could actually do with it. And then very quietly, without telling anyone, she made a decision. She went to Aldwin first. The priestess had her rooms in the North Tower, away from the rest of the castle's activity. Small rooms, careful rooms, lined with records and sealed cases, and the kind of organized order that belonged to someone who had been keeping something safe for a very long time. Aldwin looked at her when she came in and did not seem surprised. You know what's happening, Calla said. Yes, the Monday session, yes. I need to understand everything. About the Edrin Veil, about the fire, about what Marin actually did and who knew and what the records show. All of it. Aldwin was quiet for a moment. You're not going to wait for the king to manage it. Not a question. He has a kingdom to run, Calla said. And this started before he was involved. It's mine to finish. Another pause. Sit down, Aldwin said. She sat. And Aldwin began. The fire had not been an accident. This was the first thing. The thing that sat at the center of everything else and made the shape of it clear. Marin Duskwell. 30 years old, newly appointed to the inner council of the previous king, had ordered the Edrin Veil estate burned on a February night 24 years ago. Not because the Edrin Veil had done anything. Not because they were a threat in any conventional political sense. Because Marin had read the old records about what the Edrin Veil were, what their presence beside a king historically meant, the shift in power dynamic, the check on council authority. She had decided that a bloodline that could stabilize a king without council intervention was a bloodline that made the council vulnerable, and she had acted on that decision with the efficiency she had since applied to everything. The estate burned. Everyone inside it should have died. But one person carried a child out, a woman, not named in the official record because she was not officially there. A woman who had come late, who had arrived in time to take the infant and run into the dark while the fire finished what Marin had started. Calla listened to this. My mother, she said, almost certainly. She came back. A pause. She went back into it. The record of the fire mentions no survivors found at the scene, Aldwin said carefully. If your mother returned to ensure that conclusion held, then no one looking would have found evidence otherwise. The child would simply be not accounted for. Lost in the smoke, she had gone back to make sure they believed it was finished. She had gone back so they would stop looking. Calla sat with this for a long time. Don't fall apart, she told herself. Not now. Not here. There's a Monday session, and you need everything Aldwin has, and you need to be thinking clearly, and you can do the other part later. In private, when there's time. When this is over, she breathed. What does the document prove, she said. Exactly. Legally. By the council's own charter, Aldwin understood what she was asking. The council charter has a provision, she said slowly. One of the original ones, from the founding. It states that any council member who authorizes the destruction of a recognized bloodline without royal decree commits an act of treason, Calla said. Treason, Aldwin confirmed, and the document has her seal, and 3 corroborating letters. Also sealed, Calla looked at the leather case. I need copies, she said. The thing about deciding to do something dangerous is that the decision itself is calm. She had noticed this before in smaller ways. When you have looked at all the options and found only one that actually fits, the moment of choosing it is quiet, almost peaceful. She made the copies herself that night. Aldwin's hand was too unsteady for the pace required. Calla's was not. She worked by candlelight at Aldwin's table. Careful, precise. each seal reproduced at the bottom of the copied letter with the exactitude she had once applied to silver polishing and fire tending and being invisible. All those years of steady hands finding a purpose she had not anticipated. Gave the copies to Aldwin for safekeeping in a different location. Then she went back to the West Wing, changed the linens on 3 rooms, tended 4 fires, carried 2 trays, went to bed, slept 4 hours. On Saturday, Edrin summoned her. She came to the chambers. He was at the desk, correspondence in front of him. Most of it related to the Monday session. She could see the council seal on the top documents. He looked at her when she came in, and she could see that he had been thinking hard and that the thinking had not resolved into anything satisfying. "Sit down," he said. She sat. "Monday," he said. "I know. They'll use the session to formally question your presence here, your background." The mark, he set down the paper he was holding. Marin has built a clean argument. Unknown servant. No documented lineage. Apparent inexplicable influence over the king. She'll make it sound like manipulation. I know. He looked at her directly. "I can shut the session down. As king I have." "Don't," she said. He stopped. "If you shut it down," she said carefully, "they'll say it proves her point. That I'm influencing you. That you're protecting me instead of the kingdom." She kept her voice even. "Let it happen, Calla. Let it happen." She met his eyes. "I have what I need." A pause. He looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him doing the calculation, trying to assess what she meant, what she had done, whether to trust the certainty in her voice, which was real, which she was not performing. "What did Aldwin give you?" he said. "Evidence," she said. "That's all you need to know right now." The silence stretched. "You're not going to tell me more than that," he said. "No." Another pause. "All right," he said. She did not let her face show the relief she felt at that. At the fact that he had simply accepted it, that he had not pushed, had not demanded. Had done the thing that very powerful men almost never managed to do, which was trust someone to know what they were doing without needing to verify the details. "There's one more thing," she said. He waited, "the mark," she said. "On Monday they'll say it's fabricated. Aldwin should be there to speak to it. I'll arrange it." She nodded. Started to rise. "Calla," she stopped. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her the way he looked at things when the words were not coming easily. When the thing he wanted to say was in a registers he did not use often. "Whatever happens Monday," he said finally, "understand that I know what you've been doing. In this room, in this keep. Since November." A pause. "I am not unaware of what that has cost you." She did not have a response for that, not a verbal one. She looked at the fire for a moment. Then back at him. "Sleep tonight," she said. "You'll need to be clear on Monday." The corner of his mouth moved. Barely. The ghost of something. "Go," he said. Not unkindly. She went. Sunday night she could not sleep. She lay in the narrow bed in the West Wing servants' quarters and stared at the ceiling and felt the mark on her chest, warm and steady, and thought about her mother running back into a burning building with her arms empty, just emptied them. She thought about 24 years of not knowing, about an elderly couple in a quiet village who had never explained anything, and she had never pushed, who had been kind, who had given her exactly what she needed and nothing she could not carry. Ho her. She did not have a memory of being told that. She was an infant. She had no memory of fire or smoke or running or a woman's voice saying the most important thing it would ever say in the dark. But she had grown up knowing, in the wordless way that some children know things, that she was supposed to be careful, supposed to be small, supposed to take up as little space as possible and do good work and stay invisible. She had done all of that. And somehow, in a keep full of people who could not see her, a man who could not sleep had looked up from his chair at midnight and actually looked. She pressed her hand over the mark. It was warm. "I know," she told it. "I know." In the West Wing, a corridor away, she heard nothing. No pacing. No boots on marble. No one moving through the dark. He was sleeping. She closed her eyes and felt the warmth on her chest and listened to the quiet and let the Sunday night pass around her. Tomorrow there would be a room full of people who wanted her gone. Tomorrow there would be a leather case full of documents with a very specific seal on them. Tomorrow there would be a reckoning 24 years in the making. But tonight, in the small hours, she lay in the dark and breathed. And from somewhere down the corridor, Edrin Veil did the same. She found something in her pocket on Sunday morning. She had not put it there. She found it while she was dressing, in the inner pocket of the work coat she wore daily. A small folded paper with 2 words on it, in handwriting she recognized as Fenwick's, which meant the message was not from Fenwick. She unfolded it. "I know you are prepared," it said. "So am I." No signature. She stood in the servants' quarters, looking at the note for a long moment. Then she folded it back up, put it in her pocket, went to work, and told herself, firmly and without ambiguity, that she was absolutely not going to think about those 2 sentences for the rest of the day. She thought about them for the rest of the day. Monday morning arrived the way difficult things always arrive. Too fast, too bright, too certain of itself. Calla dressed in the dark before dawn. She did not take extra care with her appearance. She was a maid. She would look like one. That was what she was, and she was not going to perform otherwise for a room of people who had already decided what she was. She tucked the folded documents inside her dress, flat against the mark. Where the warmth was, she braided her hair back. Plain, clean, she looked at the window. The mountains in the early dark, the first gray suggestion of light along the ridge. Somewhere up there, she thought, there was a woman who ran into a fire for you. Don't waste it. She picked up the candle. She went out. The council hall of Grimwall Keep had not been built for comfort. That was intentional. The original architects had understood something about power that later generations kept trying to forget, that it should feel like weight, that the people who walked into rooms where decisions were made should feel the stone above them and the stone beneath them and understand, in their bodies before their minds, that what happened here mattered. Black stone walls, high ceiling, windows too narrow to let in much light. Long oak table running the length of the room, 12 chairs on each side, and at the far end, the chair that was larger than the others and currently empty. Edrin had not arrived yet. Calla had. She stood near the entrance. Not at the table, not seated. She had not been invited to sit, and she was not going to stand at the table uninvited. Because one of the few advantages she still had was that nobody in this room had correctly assessed what she was going to do, and she intended to keep it that way for as long as possible. The council members filed in, 22 of them. Some she recognized from the great hall, some from corridors, some she had refilled wine glasses for on their visits to Grimwall. Anonymous hands around a tray, moving through their peripheral vision like furniture. None of them had ever looked at her directly. Most of them were looking at her now. She kept her hands still at her sides and her face even, and her eyes forward, and breathed the way she had taught herself to breathe in difficult rooms. Slow, full, invisible from the outside, Marin Duskwell entered last. Of course she did. Silver hair correct, dark coat correct, hands folded, timing precise. She entered like someone who had choreographed their own arrival, and the choreography had been practiced until it looked like it hadn't been. She looked at Calla. Calla looked back. Neither of them said anything, which was fine. There was nothing to say yet. The saying would come. But this moment, this first moment where the 2 of them stood in the same room, with the same knowledge between them, and neither pretended otherwise. This was its own kind of conversation. Marin smiled. Small, correct. Calla did not. The door opened, Edrin. He entered without ceremony. No announcement, no procession. Just the man himself in dark council dress, moving at his usual pace, which was the pace of someone who understood that the room would adjust to him rather than the other way around. He was right. It did. Chairs straightened. Voices stopped. The quality of the air changed the way it always changed when he entered any space. He went to the chair at the head of the table, sat, looked at the room, looked at Calla. Briefly. 1 second. No expression visible. She gave him nothing back. Not because she was withholding. Because there was nothing to give yet. The conversation that mattered was not between them right now. Begin, he said. Lord Caston went first. He was a competent man. She had watched him at the great hall dinners over 3 years. Always precise. Always measured. Never saying more than was needed, and never quite saying less. He laid out the council's concerns in the voice of reasonable neutrality that reasonable men use when they want to appear objective about something they have already decided. The West Wing situation. The unusual access. The king's changed behavior. All presented with the framing of concern for His Majesty rather than anything as direct as suspicion. Calla listened the way he had listened to rooms for 24 years. Not just to the words, to the architecture of it, the order in which things were said, the spaces between them, where the logic was sound and where it was borrowing confidence from adjacency. It was well constructed. She gave Marin that. Because Marin had constructed it, she could see it in the scaffolding. The way each speaker picked up where the last one ended without apparent coordination. The way the word influence appeared in different forms every 3 or 4 minutes without anyone saying it first. Drip, drip, drip. Until the room was wet with it. Lady Vane went next. Softer approach. The concerned voice. No one questions that His Majesty's well-being has appeared to improve, she said carefully, but the circumstances by which that improvement arrived raise questions that the Council has a responsibility to examine. Then Moran spoke. She stood, unhurried, the unhurried of someone who knows they do not need to rush. I have served this keep for 30 years, she said. Under 2 kings. I have seen advisors come and go. I have seen alliances and manipulations and every variety of personal interest dressed up as something purer. She paused. I am not suggesting bad intent. I am suggesting that a maid with no documented background, no verified lineage, no title, no accountability, who appears in the king's private chambers and subsequently becomes a permanent fixture of the West Wing rotation. Another pause, perfectly timed, warrants examination. As any unknown variable in proximity to the crown should, clean, reasonable, utterly devastating in its surface-level sensibleness. Several heads around the table nodded, not enthusiastically, but they nodded. Caston looked at Edrin. Your Majesty, would you like to speak to the situation directly? Edrin looked at Caston for a long moment. Then he looked at Calla. Not a question. Not a direction. Something more open than either. The look of a man who had said, I am prepared, and meant it, and was now waiting to see what that actually looked like in practice. She stepped forward. I will speak, she said. Every head in the room turned. She had not been invited to speak. She was not at the table. She was not a council member. She was, by every formal definition in this room, a maid who had walked through the door and was currently standing in a space that was not technically hers to stand in. Nobody stopped her, because the king had not stopped her, and because there was something in the way she moved forward. Not aggressive, not deferential. The steady walk of someone who knows where the ground is under their feet and has decided to stand on it. She reached the near end of the table, stopped, looked at the room, every face, held them each for exactly 1 second, left to right, the way you look at a room when you need it to know you see it. My name is Calla Ren, she said. I've worked in Grimwall Keep for 3 years. In that time, most of you have had wine poured by my hand and could not have named me if you tried. She let that land. Brief. That is not a complaint. It's a fact. And it's relevant. She reached into her dress, pulled out the folded documents, set them on the table. Priestess Aldwin is outside this hall, she said. She has the originals of what you're looking at. These are copies verified by her seal. I made them myself, so if there are questions about transcription accuracy, I will answer them. Silence. Lord Casson frowned slightly and reached for the nearest document, started reading. His expression did not change immediately. That was the sign of a careful man. He read the whole thing. Then the next. Then he set them down and looked at the table surface for a moment, and then at Marin, Lady Duskwell. He said, very carefully. Marin had not moved. She was looking at the documents on the table. Her hands were still folded. Her face was still correct. But something underneath the correctness had shifted. Some internal adjustment. Like a very precise instrument encountering a reading it had not been calibrated for. These are 30 years old, she said. Calm. Records from a council that no longer exists. Context matters. The Edrin Veil estate burned 24 years ago. Calla said. 32 people died, including my mother, who carried me out first and then went back in, so whoever had ordered the fire would believe no one survived. Silence. Different from before. The seal on those documents is yours, Calla continued. Altbowen has 3 corroborating letters from the council members who received your orders that night. 2 of those men are still alive and are currently in this keep. She did not look away from Marin. I assume they did not know you were still pursuing the matter 24 years later. I assume you kept that to yourself.
Marin's mouth opened, closed. Something happened in her face that Calla had never seen there before. Marin Duskwell lost her composure, not dramatically, not all at once.
More like a very fine crack appearing in something that had been constructed with extraordinary care over a very long time. You could see it in the set of her jaw, the way her hands tightened against each other, the way her eyes moved to Edrin and then away. Quickly, Your Majesty, she said, controlled, working hard for controlled. This girl is making accusations that... Those aren't accusations, Edrin said, one sentence. Flat. Final. The sentence of a man who has been thinking about what he was going to say for 3 days, and has reduced it to its essential form. Marin looked at him, and he looked back at her. 8 years of mornings and councils and correspondence, and the particular intimacy of being the person a powerful man trusts. To handle the things he cannot always handle himself. 8 years, and he looked at her now with the face of a man who has made a final accounting and found the numbers do not add up, and has accepted that finding without drama, without sentiment. Marin understood what was in that look.
Calla watched her understand it. It did not end cleanly. Nothing real does. That was one of the things you learned, if you lived long enough and paid attention.
The versions of things that ended cleanly were the ones that got told afterward, smoothed and shaped by the retelling. The actual events were messier, longer, full of silences that went on past the point where they were comfortable, and voices that rose before someone else brought them back down. Marin argued. Carefully at first, then less carefully. She challenged the authenticity of the documents. She challenged Aldwin's reliability. She challenged the mark on Calla's chest, which Aldwin confirmed from the doorway when Edrin had her brought in, and which 3 council members examined in the particular manner of people who do not want to be wrong about something and are checking very thoroughly. The mark was real. Aldwin's voice was steady when she spoke, 70-something years old, and she stood in that doorway and said every word without flinching and let the room do what rooms do when someone tells them a true thing they were not expecting to hear. Casson called for a recess. They took it. Calla stood near the wall during the recess and did not let herself think too far forward. She focused on the room, the conversations happening in low voices near the windows, the 2 men who had gone immediately to find Aldwin in the corridor, the council members who had received Marin's orders 24 years ago, having the conversation she expected them to have, with expressions that suggested it was not going the way Marin might have hoped. Edrin stood near the head of the table, She did not go to him. He did not come to her. They stayed on their respective sides of the room and let the recess be what it was, which was other people catching up to something that had already been decided. When the session resumed, Lord Caston spoke first. He was still careful, still measured, but the architecture of what he was saying had changed. The neutrality that had been angled toward Marin's position had leveled out. He was working, Calla could see, toward a conclusion that he could defend as having arrived at reasonably, which was less about what was right and more about what the record would show. But it was moving in the correct direction, and she was not going to be particular about the mechanism. The documents present a serious concern, Caston said, one that the council cannot dismiss without investigation. He looked at Marin. Lady Duskwell, you will understand that pending that investigation, your advisory role. I understand, Marin said, 2 words, and then she went quiet. Not the quiet of defeat, the quiet of someone removing themselves from a situation they can no longer control with the same dignity they used to control it. She sat back, folded her hands, looked at the table surface, and did not look at Calla again, and did not look at Edrin again. The thing that had driven her, the certainty that had been precise and terrible enough to order a fire set around sleeping people. It did not vanish. It was still there. You could see it in the structure of her, in the way she sat. But it was contained now. Checked. Which was, Calla thought, probably all you could ask for from certain kinds of dangerous things. The session was not over after that. There were more questions, more documents reviewed. Aldwin spoke at length about the Edrin Veil lineage and the history of the bloodline and the significance of the mark. And most of the council listened with the focused attention of people who have had the ground shifted under them and are trying to figure out where the new solid places are. Calla answered the questions she was asked, directly. Without embellishment, she did not perform anything. She was simply there, present, steady, consistent. It was 3 in the afternoon when Edrin called the session closed. The council filed out. Caston paused near Calla on his way past and looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man revising an assessment. He did not say anything. But the look said something. That was enough. Marin left without looking at either of them. Aldwin squeezed Calla's hand briefly at the doorway. Small, warm. The gesture of someone who has been keeping a secret for 24 years and has just been allowed to set it down. Then the room was empty except for the 2 of them. Edrin was still at the head of the table, not sitting anymore. Standing. Turned toward the window. The narrow window that showed a strip of mountain and winter sky. Gray and white and very still. Calla stayed where she was near the near end of the table. The distance between them was probably 30 feet. It felt like less. You did it without me, he said. Yes, I was prepared to. I know, a pause. I didn't need you to. He turned from the window, looked at her. She looked back. This was the moment she understood, where everything that had been accumulating since November was going to either settle or not settle, and there was nothing she could do to manage that except stand in it honestly and see what it decided. Why? He said. She thought about it. The real answer. Because someone spent their life making sure I would be here, she said. And the least I could do was handle my own part of it. Edrin looked at her for a long time. Your mother, he said. Yes, you did it for her. She thought about that. The fire she did not remember. The woman she could not name. The cold February night 24 years ago. And a pair of empty arms running back towards something burning. Partly, she said. Partly for her. She looked at the table. The document still spread across it. The record of something terrible and the evidence that it had not in the end succeeded. And partly because I've spent my whole life being the girl no one sees. And I decided I was tired of letting people who didn't know what I was capable of set the limits on what I could do. The room was very quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when the right thing has been said in the right room and the space knows it. Edrin moved, not quickly, not dramatically. He walked the length of the table toward her, and she stood still and did not step back, and he stopped in front of her, at approximately the distance they had always maintained. The careful, reasonable distance of two people who had been circling something for months and had not yet named it. He looked at her face, not at the documents, not at the mark. At her face. "You're the first person," he said, "in 8 years who has done something because they decided to, not because I ordered it, not because of what I represent." He paused, "just because it needed doing." She met his eyes. "You do that too," she said. He frowned slightly. "You ran the border patrols yourself last fall," she said. "You could have sent commanders. You went." A pause. "Because it needed doing." He was quiet for a moment. "That's different, it isn't." Another pause. "No," he said. "I suppose it isn't." At some point, Calla pulled out the chair nearest her and sat down. Edrin pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. The room was empty. The documents were still spread across the table. The fire in the far wall had burned down to low coals, and the afternoon light through the narrow windows had gone from pale gold to pale gray. "They'll reconvene tomorrow," Edrin said. "Formally. About Marin, I know. The investigation will take time." "Yes, you'll need to be available for questions." She looked at him. "Are you telling me to stay?" He looked back, and for a moment, the structure of his face did something it almost never did. Something that was not quite a smile but was related to one. "Yes," he said. "I'm telling you to stay." She looked at the table, the documents, the evidence of a night she could not remember that had made her into everything she currently was. "All right," she said, "Sybil as that." "All right." The investigation took 3 weeks. Caston ran it with the precision of a man who understood that the finding was going to reshape the council's structure significantly and wanted the process to be clean enough to withstand the reshaping. Marin cooperated, not fully, not without pushing at the edges, but enough. With the particular cooperation of someone who has assessed the situation and determined that cooperation is now the most strategically sound position available. Calla was questioned 4 times. She answered everything, directly, without embellishment or performance. She stated what she knew and how she knew it and what she had done and why, and she left the judgment of it to the room because the judgment of it was not her job. Edrin was questioned once, briefly, about the events of November and after. He answered in the way he answered most things, precisely, without offering more than was asked, but without withholding either. On the 19th day, Caston delivered the finding. Marin Duskwell had authorized the destruction of the Edrin Veil estate without royal decree. This was confirmed by the documents, by the testimony of 2 surviving council members who had received her orders, and by Marin's own qualified admission, which was not exactly a confession but was close enough to function as one. The charge was treason. The penalty under the charter was removal from all positions of authority and exile from the Northern Territories. Marin stood when the finding was read. She did not argue. She stood the way she had always stood, straight, deliberate, every part of her organized. And she looked at Edrin when Caston finished speaking, and what was in that look was complex, as the look of someone at the end of a very long project always is. Failure and calculation, and something that might, underneath all the other things, have been something closer to relief. She looked at Calla after. One moment, then she looked away. And the guards came, and that was the end of Lady Marin Duskwell in Grimwall Keep. The evening of the 19th day was quiet, genuinely quiet. The kind that settled in after something large had finished moving through. Calla sat in the West Wing storage room, on the wooden crate that had become a kind of accidental throne, and looked at the wall and let the quiet be what it was. The mark on her chest was warm. It was always warm now. She had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing things that are simply part of the landscape. It was there. It was real. It meant something she was still working out the edges of. She heard his footsteps in the corridor, not pacing, not the rhythm of the noise, just walking. Coming toward her, he appeared in the doorway, looked at her on the crate. "Storage room," he said. "It's quiet. Your actual room is quiet. This one is a different kind of quiet." He looked at her for a moment. Then, without any apparent ceremony, he found the other wooden crate along the far wall and pulled it out and sat on it. Calla looked at the king of Grimwall sitting on a storage crate in the west wing and thought several things very quickly and then set all of them aside. "It's done," she said. "Yes. How does it feel?" He thought about it. "Like a tooth that's been aching so long you forgot it was aching. And then it stops. A pause. And you spend a day convinced it's about to start again. But it doesn't. Not yet," she nodded. "It might feel real by next week. Possibly." He looked around the storage room. Shelves of linens and candles and supplies stacked with the precise order she maintained. "You organized this yourself?" "Everyone always said I was thorough. No one said your name." "I know." She looked at the shelves. "I was thorough anonymously." "Which is its own kind of skill." He looked at her. "Yes," he said. "It is." They sat in the storage room for a while. Not long. Long enough. The kind of time that does not need to be justified by what happens in it. Then Edrin said, "The council wants to formalize your position." She looked at him. "What does that mean?" she said carefully. "It means they want a title to attach to what you are. Something they can put in the record." He met her eyes. "Something that gives you standing, accountability, protection." She was quiet for a moment. "What kind of title?" she said. "That," he said, "is a conversation for people who are not sitting on storages." She laughed, not a performance of laughter, not a polite sound. An actual laugh that surprised her slightly on the way out, because she had not been expecting it. And neither, from his expression, had he. He looked at her when she laughed. The complete attention, but different now. Less like a man recording information. More like a man looking at something he had not expected to find, and was still slightly uncertain what to do about the finding, except that he was certain about wanting to keep it. "All right," she said, when the laugh had settled. "Then we'll have that conversation somewhere else." "Yes," he said. 3 days after the investigation closed, Edrin asked her to walk with him, not in the keep. Outside. The north courtyard, which in winter was mostly used for nothing. He came to the west wing corridor in his heavy coat and looked at her and said, "Walk with me." And she put on her own coat and went. The courtyard was very quiet. Snow had fallen the night before, a fresh layer over the old, and their footsteps were the only marks in it. The mountains to the north were visible this morning. White peaks against a pale blue that was almost colorless, vast and indifferent. Beautiful, if you looked long enough, in the way of things that do not care whether you find them beautiful. Edrin walked with his hands clasped behind him. Looking at the mountains, she walked beside him. They were quiet for a while. "I've been thinking about Saren," he said. She did not say anything. Waited. "Not the way I used to," he said. "I used to think about her the way you think about a wound. Carefully. Around it. Aware of where it was at every moment so you don't accidentally put weight on it." He paused. "Now I think about her the way you think about someone who was part of your life. Without the..." He stopped, bracing, she offered. Yes, he glanced at her briefly. "Without the bracing," they walked, "she would have found this interesting," he said. "All of it. The mark, the documents. You standing up in the council hall." A pause. She had opinions about the council. Strongly held opinions. Calla felt something. Not quite jealousy, not grief. Something more complicated. The particular feeling of learning about someone who mattered deeply to someone who matters to you, which has its own specific texture. "She sounds like she was formidable," Calla said. She was. He was quiet for a moment. "She would not have wanted me to spend 8 years in that corridor." "No," Calla said. "Probably not." He looked at the mountains. "I know that," he said. I have known it for a long time. Knowing it and stopping were two different things, she nodded. They reached the far wall of the courtyard, stood looking out at the white. The council wants to use the title of keeper, Edrin said. For your official position, it's an old designation. Comes from the charter's earliest provisions. It carries standing. Authority in certain matters. Keeper, she repeated. Keeper of the Edrin Veil record. Which includes advising the crown on matters related to the bloodline and its history. She looked at the snow. That's a narrow specialty. Yes, he said. They'll expand it. Will they? Because I'll ask them to. He paused. If you're willing. She turned and looked at him. He was looking at her, the complete attention. The attention that had felt like an assessment in November and felt like something else entirely now. Why? She said. Not challenging. Genuinely asking. He was quiet for a moment. Because you walked into a room full of people who had decided what you were, he said. And you put evidence on the table and made them revise the decision. Not because you were afraid of what would happen if you didn't. Because it was right. He paused. I have been looking for someone with that particular quality for a very long time. She held his gaze. That's a very practical reason, she said. Yes. Is it the only one? The pause was longer than the others. No, he said. It isn't. The courtyard was very still. The snow, the sky, the mountains doing what they always did. Simply being there, enormous and permanent, outlasting all the small urgent dramas happening below them. All right, she said. All right to which part? She thought about it. All of it, she said. I suppose? He nodded. Once. The way he nodded when a decision had been made, and the making was done, and what remained was simply the executing. That night she slept deeply and without dreaming. She woke at dawn the way she always woke. Alert. The gray light coming through the small window and the cold pressing at the walls and the keep settling around her. The way old keeps settle in deep winter. She lay still for a moment, listened. The west corridor was quiet. No footsteps, no pacing. No boots on marble at an hour when boots had no business being on marble. Just the silence of a building at rest. She pressed her hand flat over the mark. Warm, steady, present. She strategy. The most difficult kind of bravery, not the visible kind. The kind that will never be witnessed by anyone who matters. That will never be known. I know, Calla told her, in the way you tell things to people who are not there. I know you did it so I would be here. I know you couldn't tell me how to do the rest of it. I know you trusted me to figure it out. I think I did, more or less. I think I found the solid ground. The mark pulsed once, soft and warm, like punctuation. She got up, got dressed plain, clean. The work clothes of a woman who still had work to do. She found him in the west corridor, not pacing. He was standing at the window at the end of the hall, the big one that looked out north toward the mountains, still in his own clothes from the night before. He had been there a while, she could tell, not anxious, just present. She stopped beside him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Outside, the mountains were beginning to catch the first light, the very peaks going from white to pale gold in the particular way that only happened in clear winter mornings. The kind that did not last long and were easy to miss if you were not looking. You slept, she said. I slept, he paused. You? Yes, he nodded. They watched the light change on the mountains. Does it still feel strange? She said. Sleeping, he thought about it. She appreciated that he actually thought about it rather than giving her the quick answer. No, he said. It feels. He paused again. It feels like I'm allowed to. She looked at him. You were always allowed to, she said quietly. I know that now. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't always. The light kept changing, the peaks going golden, and then bright. And then just white again as the full morning arrived. Your Majesty, she said. Edrin, he said. She paused. That's a significant step, she said. Yes, he said, it is. She looked at the mountains. Edrin, she said. He nodded. Once. Like a question answered. They stood at the window and watched the morning come in. And the mountains do what mountains do, and the keep settle fully into the day around them. The guards would change shifts soon. The kitchen would start the morning fires. The council would meet to begin the administrative work of recomposing a structure that had been organized around a woman who was no longer there. There was a great deal to do. There was always a great deal to do. But for this moment, in the quiet before the day fully started, they stood at the window together, and the king of Grimwall Keep, who had not slept for 8 years, and had spent that time walking corridors in the dark and carrying everything alone, stood beside a woman who had stood in a room full of people who wanted her gone and put the truth on the table anyway, and breathed steadily. All the way in, all the way out. Like a man who had finally been given permission to be where he was. Like a man who, for the first time in 8 winters, had nowhere else to be.